All right, guys, today we're talking about middling or finding a middle, catching a middle. The definition of that would be if you've got a favorite at a lower spread than an underdog, maybe at two different books, you can try and find a middle. An example would be, let's say I had a favorite at one sports book that was minus 6.5. I had another sports book where the underdog was plus 7.5. I would be looking to catch a middle. I would put a bet on the underdog plus 7.5, the favorite minus 6.5, and if the game lands on 7, I'm going to win both bets. That's called catching a middle or middling. Now, this is done most of the time in basketball and football because those are the games that we bet on the spread most often. But I see all too many times people trying to go for a middle, but they have no idea if they're getting the better of it, if there's an actual advantage there. It's nice when you hit because you'll win double your bet. You're going to hit, if you're a $100 bettor, you're going to hit 100 on both sides when that middle hits. So what you need to figure out is, am I paying too much juice? Am I going to lose in the long run compared to the low amount of times that I'm actually going to win this bet? Now, there's an easy calculation to do this. If you're familiar with expected value, EV type of calculations, and we've talked about that plenty here at the channel, you can go back to some old videos and refresh yourself if you are unfamiliar with doing that. But you really need a good grasp of EV, simple calculation. But when you're doing a lot of these analysis and seeing if the bet is worth making, you're going to have to do an EV calculation. All right, let's look at this really simple Excel spreadsheet that I've put together here, and it's a hypothetical, but we're going to look at the NBA. And I'm going over the NBA because right now we're in the middle of the NBA season. Actually, we're in the middle of the NBA playoffs. And I've done some analysis on scoring margin, how often each scoring margin hits. And you can see that here in green. Now, we can't totally exactly use this as is, right? And I'm going to go over that in a second. But if you just take a look at this, this is how often each game lands on this specific number. So games land on a 3, 5.61% of the times. You'll actually see the games in this 6 range from 6 to 8 land the most, actually 5 to 8. Games land on those numbers the most. That has a lot to do with what scores teams will foul with. So that has a lot to do with why games land on a certain number in basketball. All right, let's look at the calculations. And if you're familiar with EV, this should be fairly simple to you, and you should be able to pick up on this rather quickly. The most important number is going to be figuring out just how often the game lands on the number that we're looking for. But first, let's kind of go over the spreadsheet. So I've got Team A. I've made a 6.5 point favorite, and we're getting 110 juice at a sports book. And let's just assume we've got a different sports book showing Team B as a plus 7.5 point underdog, and they're also laying 110 juice. Now your bet size is going to be $100, and we'll do the calculations. This is EV calculation for a 1 point middle. So the first scenario, we're going to have the dogs losing both sides. So how do we figure that out? We've got, of course, if the dog loses both sides, that means the favorite has to win one of those bets. So the favorite is going to win this underdog bet, meaning the favorite won this game by 8 points or more. So they win the bet, I should say, they win this minus 6.5 bet. So we win $100 on that bet. We're going to lose $110 on this underdog at plus 7.5 because the game landed 8 or higher in the favorite's favor. So we lose $10. All right. Now, if we look at dogs winning both games, or dogs winning both of these bets, in other words, the dog kept this game 6 points or less or won the game outright, that would mean we would lose this bet with the favorite. So we'd lose $110 for every 100 we bet. On the underdog side, we would win $100. Therefore, we would net minus $10 on those bets. Now, the middle. Of course, this happens when we hit the game exactly 7. And what happens, we're going to win double our bet size because we bet 100 at minus 6.5, 100 at plus 7.5, and the game lands at 7. We win both plus 200. Now, the key, how do we calculate if this is a good bet or not? Firstly, we need to know just how often games land on a 7. Now, if you look at the chart in green, you see 6.71% of the time games will land on a 7. That's taking into account every single game that's been played. Now, sometimes the underdog is going to win this game by 7 points. You may have a situation where a 6.5-point dog wins a game by 7. So we don't want to calculate those. I don't want to take those into the equation. I want to only look at games where the line was somewhere between 5.5 and 8.5. You can widen that range a little bit, but it doesn't change the number all that much. And what I come up with is 4.9%. Now, I have a chart on every single one of these middles. So the number for 3 or a 4 or a 5, 6, and so on. I've got numbers for all of those. And if you want that, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get that to you. But I just want to show you the mechanics on how to actually do the calculation. So if you agree that 4.9% of the time we're going to hit a middle, then the calculation is simple. So we know that 4.9% of the time we hit a middle, it's approximately 5%. So we've got 95.1% of the time we're going to either the dog lose both bets or the dog wins both. In other words, we split. So 47.55% of the time we split on the dogs lose both, and 47.55% of the time we split on the dogs win both. So 47.55% multiplied by the 10 gives us minus 4,755. We take the 4.9% probability that we hit this middle and we multiply that by the 200, which is what we'll win every time that happens, and we get $9.8. And then of course we have the same calculation here for when the dogs win both, and we come up with minus 4,755. Now you'll see, well, firstly, if the numbers are accurate, we have actually a slight advantage here of 0.29 cents. So we're going to play this. If we play this bet over and over again, we can expect on average every time we bet $100 to make 29 cents. Not a great advantage, and of course it's really reliant on this number. If this number changes slightly, of course we're not going to have nearly as big an advantage. We go down to 4.8%, it's almost flat, and 4.7%, we're actually in the negative. But I've got it at 4.9%, but that's going to be pretty much not a bet you're probably going to want to make. You're not going to go out of your way to make this bet. But what we have to determine is at what number, at what price. Now, perhaps you were able to get minus 105. Well, that changes things significantly. Now you've got plus $2.67 in expected value there on that bet. Now, it's unlikely you're going to get a middling situation like this at exactly the same time of day with two different books. They're not going to be that widespread. But what you could get is a situation where you put a bet in early, the line is now moved, and you've got a situation where you can potentially play a middle. Let's say you really like a side. You're not actually betting a side. Let's say you're really good at figuring out which way lines may move. You think a team was totally overpriced. The favorite was 7.5 early in the morning. You think that price is just ridiculous. You go ahead and put the bet in on the underdog, getting 7.5, and lo and behold, as the day moves on, you could get minus 6.5, minus 105. Now you have to do the calculation and figure out, is it worthwhile here for me to make a bet on the other side of this game, or do I have an advantage here of playing the 7.5 on its own, which you probably do. You'd probably actually want to leave that bet, but I want to show you how to calculate the middle so that you know over time exactly how much you're going to make. Now, you should be able to do the calculation for what your expected value is on a plus 7.5 that closes at minus 6.5. I'll do a video on that at another time, but for now, we're just going to work on middling. Now, of course, in the NFL, these numbers are going to be fairly different on the significant numbers. Numbers like 3, 4, 7, 10 in the NFL, those are significant numbers. There's a reason that sports books are reluctant to move off of the 3 on big games like the Super Bowl, because they don't want to open themselves up to a middle, because the potential for a game landing on 3 is much higher than other numbers in the NFL. But I wanted to show you this as an example where 7 is one of the most likely numbers in basketball to come out, just how hard it is really to hit a middle and to find a really good price on a middle. Now, how would you work this if you had, let's say, this game was minus 7 and plus 7.5? Let's say you had minus 7, minus 105. Well, what would happen here is if the game lands on 7, these statistics or these probabilities will not change in this situation. What's going to change is how much you win on a middle, because now what's going to happen is you're going to push this bet and you're going to win this bet. So instead of winning 200, you win just 100. And that moves this now to a negative EV type of play. So you would have to have significantly better odds. You'd have to have maybe plus odds here, or let's just say if we had this at flat minus 100, that would actually move it in our favor. So if we had this at minus 105, what does that do? Just a slight edge. So as you can see, the juice matters significantly here. It's a really simple calculation. The only thing you really need to know is what's the probability of each number coming out. And if you want to know that, leave a comment down below. I'll be happy to send you a chart of all of that information. All right, so that's middling, and you now know how to do those calculations. You should be able to quickly just build a spreadsheet like this, plug in the numbers. All you need to really know now is how often does each middle number come out. The other thing you may encounter is possibly you have a 2-number middle where you can hit 2 numbers. Let's say in our situation, we had a minus 6 and a plus 7.5. You'd have the opportunity for 6 and 7 to be a middle. You'd push on the 6, you'd win both bets on the 7. In that case, you'd work it out the same exact way. You just add one more number in there, and that is what's the probability of hitting a 6. Well, we've got the Sharp app coming out, and that's going to help you here with middling. It's also going to help you find the best prices you possibly can. So in your state, you're going to have different sports books that are legal, and you're going to want to look in your particular state at our aggregator, which is going to tell you exactly which prices are best for each individual game, so that you could quickly look. If you like a game, you like a side on a game, you'll know which sportsbook is offering the best price on that game. What you'll also be able to do as far as middling goes is track all the sports books in your state and see just when maybe the price gets to a point where you can make a profitable middle bet. So this is just another tool in your tool belt. And even if you don't really play a lot of middles, I don't get the opportunity to play many middles. You really got to be on top of it. And as you can see, it's really difficult to do. It's tough to find that middle play. Oftentimes, if I do get the best of a price, if I get in early, let's say on that dog that was plus 7.5, the line's now moved down to 6.5. I'm really not looking for a middle in those situations. I'm looking to see that I can win that bet. I'm going to probably have more EV in that situation than I would by playing for a middle. But again, there's opportunities there sometimes where you want a middle. One that's really popular is if you're in some sort of an office pool. This happens a lot in the NCAA pool where you may be in the championship game, and let's say you put $10 in and now you have a chance to win $500 in your office pool if the favorite wins. And the favorite is a 7.5 point favorite, like in our example. All you have to do is win the game outright. It's an office pool and there's no point spread attached to it. In that case, now you've got a 7-point margin where your team can either win by less than the 7, in which case you will then win your office pool. But if you bet the other side, you'd win that side as well, and then you'd catch a huge middle and win on both. So we'll get into that in another video, but just another idea of how you can use middling. And again, if you download the Sharp app, which is going to be coming out this week, a lot of you are going to be watching this video, and the app will hopefully be out already. Go download it. You'll see we've got an aggregator. We get a bet tracker in there. There's going to be more and more tools. Hopefully, we're going to add some tools in here where you won't even have to do these calculations in Excel. We're just going to let you know if the middle is profitable or not. So little by little, we'll have those in there for you guys. But in the meantime, I hope you got a good grasp of middling. Rewatch this if you haven't, and be sure to leave a comment, and I'll be happy to answer any questions there. So also want to head over to the Discord chat. I'll leave the link to that down below. You could always ask me questions in Discord as well for the Sports Bet Army. And good luck. So let's make some money together.